We'll start by mixing the skies. So mixing cobalt blue, and that's good enough for that. And then we're going to have a little bit of pink, so permanent rose. Again, we don't want that to be too strong. And then a bit of orange. And again, we don't want it to be too strong. That should be okay. And then for the ground, it's a brown with a hint of green in it. So let's just start with some raw umber. And a little bit of cobalt turquoise. We just got to remember the light's coming from over here. So we'll start a little bit of blue and give the sky just a small angle like that. A bit more water. I'm going to pick up some of the orange. And a little bit of the pink. And I'll go back into the blue over the hills just to cool them down a bit. Now what I'm doing here, just some quick, very light but quick dry brush strokes in the distance. And I'm going to turn the odd one of those into a house or something, just a roof. So we'll just leave a few of those white bits there later. Some of those will go away when I paint the trees, but others hopefully will read right as a roof. So that's the sky. So we've got a nice graded wash from cool to warm, dark tone to lighter tones. And then we'll go in with the distant green. Even though these are dark cows, I'm going to try and paint around them only because I find the green can come through even on dark colour sometimes. Now you would have noticed I brought the sky down to that leading edge, and it was a very wet wash. So what happens when I then paint my first grass wash, some of that paint continues to flow down the paper and does two things. Dilutes it, so that helps to add that to the painting because things are lighter in the distance. And the other thing it does is it adds a little bit of blue to it, which also helps add depth. Okay, now I'm going to just add some more raw umber to it. So I've mixed about 3 gallons more than I needed here, but c'est la vie. Let's get rid of this orange and the pink. I don't need that anymore. Now I've got the path, and I want that to be quite a broken edge. Start with some raw umber, but I'm going to add a little bit of burnt sienna to it. But it's a dull grey, so I'm going to add some cobalt blue. A bit more burnt sienna. Lots of dry brush strokes to start with. And I didn't mix enough. My brush strokes are in the direction of the path. And leave that as a broken edge. Just re-establish that edge there a bit. And then we'll go back into this green. And I'll make this green a bit brighter. I'm going to get rid of half of this. I just mixed way too much. I'm going to add some more raw umber, some aureolin, a bit more cobalt turquoise. there's a slight dip here, which I don't mind adding if I can create that effect. That's good. Add a bit of splatter here just to add interest. That's good. You don't want to go in too heavy-handed with this splatter. What I mean by that, you don't want to use too big a brush, and you don't want it to be overly loaded with water. Oops. On the roadway, the French ultramarine and burnt sienna. Just about. This area here is looking a bit too solid, and there'd be light hitting this because it's a bit of a ridge. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to drizzle some water along that edge. Let that run down. There's going to be a shadow running through most of the road, so a lot of these light passages are going to become shadow colour. Just trying to create the impression of some ruts and things like that. by making sure this is lighter, when I do the shadow across here, there'll be some nice contrast. Whereas if I keep this area dark, when I put the shadow in, I won't have as much light being represented in my painting, because the contrast between the shadow area and the light area won't be as great. So that's what I've been playing with here. So now we work on the hill, and it's important that we get the hill right, because that really adds to that feeling of afternoon light. I'm just going to clean out parts of my palette. I don't need this dull green. Good. Get rid of that. With the cobalt blue, we're probably going to end up adding some French ultramarine in there, but the two can work together, so no use throwing it away. The color of the hill is a slightly darker version of this here. So that says we'll start with some raw umber. Add a little bit of cobalt turquoise. Remember, I use the word little bit. So this is the green I've mixed, and that will work for my hill. It may be a little bit different for yours, depending on what other greens you've used here. And then we've got that shadow, so I want to be ready to put that in. My shadow color normally is French ultramarine. Yeah, if it's a blue sky, French ultramarine and a little bit of permanent rose, and usually just a hint of burnt sienna, just so it's not super bright. Sometimes it's not that critical on the ground, because you've already got the earth colors on the ground, like raw umber or burnt sienna, but here I add just a little bit of burnt sienna to it. And then we've got the trees. They'll go in quite early. For that, we're just going to mix some raw umber, a little bit of French ultramarine, the grey, barely green colour, just a little bit lighter, so I add just a fraction more water. Remember, I'm going to have bigger trees in the foreground that are going to be even darker in tone. I'm going to add a bit more water to that. Make it just a little bit lighter. So add some water up here. So I put a brush mark. It was too dark, so I added more water, both to my mix and to my painting. And any of this that's left over I can use when I'm painting the trees. By using a big brush, I can cover a big area very fast. Now remember, before I talked about a few of these shapes could become buildings, and all I need to do for them is just to paint around a few. I think this is going to be too strong. Just dilute it. Take out about 3/4 of the water. Barely touching the paper. So I'm resting this part of my hand on the dry painting. If it's not dry, then don't rest your hand on it. I'll just add a bit of French ultramarine to part of that. Down a bit more raw umber. Strengthen its tone, and then I'm going to drop some of that in here and there amongst those trees. Now, the part that makes this difficult is the hard edges on the hill, which means we're going to need to dry this fairly soon. Otherwise, if I try to paint all these other trees, they're going to be very soft shapes, and I won't get that hard edge. It's here and on the bottom of the shadow line. My hill is probably a little bit greener than what's in the reference, but it doesn't matter. The important thing is to get the tones right and the edges right. Now, while this is wet, I've got the opportunity to put some wet on wet trees in this area, so I'm going to put that in first. Pick up some more green. Some more of this dull green. Then add some raw umber to it, a little bit of the turquoise, and a little bit of the aureolin this time because some of those trees have more green in them. And it's got to be thicker paint than is already there. The water's beading down here, so I'm just going to lift some of that. I'll just quickly go across with this colour around some of these shapes that are going to be houses. These trees in the foreground are going to be quite bright, so I won't paint there. And then there's little shadow areas, so I'll add a bit of French ultramarine, a little bit more raw umber. Get some burnt sienna, more French ultramarine. Didn't bother cleaning the brush, so whatever was in this green was fine. And I'm going to just use that to draw in a few hints at trunks. All the while I'm doing this is drying, right? Now, if it dries enough, I don't need to use the hairdryer on it. If I do have to use a hairdryer on it, then because it will have dried more, there's less chance I'm going to disturb the surface. That's why I'm spending a little bit of time looking at what other things I can do before I get the hairdryer out. I'm just breaking up that edge. Take out about 90% of the moisture in my brush, and then I'm going to run it there, just a little dry brush stroke. Now I'm going to dry it. We need to let that cool. I'm going to put a little bit of water up here just to help stick this down. You need a very light touch when doing this. Two things are happening while I'm doing this. I'm looking at the photo to see what is actually there, and at the same time I'm deciding what is worth leaving out and what I should put in. So not all the trees necessarily have to go in. So while I'm using the tip of the brush, I'm hardly touching the paper to create some broken edges where I can. Some of these trees are dark because they've got shadow on them. I'll probably go over them when I do the shadow shape. And these trees that are sort of standalone. I can't have sharp edges there and soft edges here, so I'll go over these now and just strengthen them a bit. I've got this darker tone I had there. Can add a bit more water to it, a little bit of aureolin. What I painted before becomes the underpainting. Change the angle of the brush, and sometimes I push this way, other times I push in the other direction. Now let's work on this shadow. Get some clean water. I'm just going to wet where I want that soft edge to be. This is the main area. I'll let that sit there. I'm going to go in, stick with my small brush for the time being. Then you've got little shadows here. And then depending on the hill, different shadow shapes being created. Some are quite straight, others look more like a tree. Let's tackle this main shadow shape. It's a bit of a soft edged area here. And up here we've got a soft edge. So let's just throw a bit of water there, a bit of water here. Again, it doesn't have to be exact. Okay. And I'll go back to my small brush and we'll connect these shadows into the trees so you don't get a sharp line through the trees. Some of these trees could have a bit stronger shadow. What's happened here, I've come too close to the edge of where I wet the paper, and the paint has then flowed and created a sharp edge where I wanted a soft edge. And then there's these little gullies everywhere. And I've just got to decide whether I'm going to bother with them. I've decided I will. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just wet this area here. Now I'm just letting that soak that water in a bit. Let me just lift it. So if you look at it, you can see how it's still got quite a bit of shine on it. Just going to see if I can hint at some of these undulations. Out of this straight edge, there's some shadows of trees and that are in there that you can't see very much of. So I might use this moment to put that in. Let's throw another one over here, because I like the way it breaks up that straight edge. And I'll get some green, just mainly French ultramarine and raw sienna, thicker mix. And I'm going to drop some of that in here and there as soft hints of trees, especially when I drag some of the shadow colour out. Throw in a few trees on this hill that may or may not exist. And they're just dabs, right? It's reasonably thick paint, gets watered down a little bit by the shadow colour. Okay, clean that off, dry it. come back into here. As soon as you make a mark and it looks wrong, that's where you stop. You don't keep playing with it. Let me just go dry this area. The area I was referring to was this area here that I had recently wet. I wanted to take some of the moisture out of it so that I can go in and create some of these shapes on the hill. So I didn't dry it completely. And here you can see this edge that's formed. Remember, I only wet to there and that paint's bled into it, and it just looks unnatural, especially when it's supposed to be a very soft edge. So I'll just lift that now before it goes any further. And I'm going to throw in a few more trees here. In between these trees, I can need more shadow. So let's paint that in. But I'll soften this leading edge because I've got foliage to paint over that. That's fine. These little houses, while I'm at it, I might as well give them a little bit of colour for the roof. Just get a bit of some permanent rose, mix it in with a little bit of this green to dull it off. Everyone on the street has red roofs now. Now I can put this tree in here. Let's do that. Pick up a little bit of burnt sienna. And a bit of French ultramarine into that same mix. A bit more raw umber. The light's coming from this side. You've got a lit side, the sunlit side, and then you've got a shadow area. So throw in some shadow. Make this side a bit darker. Also it gets darker as it gets closer to the ground. And then we've got these bright deciduous trees. Grab some of this. We'll start with some aureolin. A little bit of turquoise. Again, that's bright green. Then we'll add some French ultramarine to that. A bit more raw umber. This will give us the darker tones. Adding a bit more burnt sienna. And later there'll be shadows that go through here. Then we've got these other trees in this area. and that's fine for that grouping. So you just got to be a little bit careful because you don't want to get the front wet. I'm going to mix some colours while I'm waiting for the paper to absorb that moisture. Just a little bit of aureolin, a bit of turquoise. You don't need a lot of those colours. You mainly need raw umber and French ultramarine. Let me go back to the paper. This green is just a little bit too dull compared to these colours here. So to brighten it up, I'll add more aureolin. And that's pretty good for that green. I don't need a lot of this colour, so I'll just put some here, add some French ultramarine to it, and some more umber. And this will become my darker tone. So you can see, you start with this colour, if you need a darker tone, rather than going back and mixing all the colours together, you've already got a mixture here. You just move some of it to a dry area and add the other colours to increase the tone or adjust its colour. A little bit of colour for the trunk. A little bit, Joe. Just some French ultramarine and burnt sienna. And a little bit of raw sienna for the lighter parts of the trunk. Or maybe not, because I've actually painted through the trunk anyway, so I might just stick with the dark for the trunk there. Okay, so let's paint these trees here. I've got one there and one there. You make this tone a bit stronger. Now here I've got this quite a sharp edge, which is from the shadow. Just to reduce the chance of sharp edge showing through the green of the foliage, I'm just going to soften that area a little bit and just break up that line. Don't have to do all of it, but at least something like that. Barely touching the paper. And we'll go in with this darker tone. Let's put this one here. Now we can do the cows. So let's have a look at that. And obviously this is the main cow. It's got the light on it. The other cows, not so much light. There's a little bit of light. If we look at this cow here, for instance, you still see some light on the back here. Because while it's in the shadow cast by the trees that are sort of off the screen, it's still getting light from above. So let's just mix some colours. So for the brown cow, just some burnt sienna. Hint of cobalt blue. That's better. And then for the darker tones, we'll just mix the same colour and maybe add French ultramarine to it too. And then the other two cows are darker still, so I might pick up some of that. And more French ultramarine. One's sort of leaning more to the black, but not quite black. So let's do that one first. Now, remember, light changes. So if you felt like you want more light on this cow and this cow, or both, or one or the other, then go ahead and do it. And it'll be darker underneath, so I'm going to get some French ultramarine into that mixture. A bit more burnt sienna. And then I'm just going to clean my brush and lift some of the highlight off the top here. Just something like that. That'll do. And the shadow will connect that to the ground. This other little cow, it's got some lighter tones on it. So I've got my burnt sienna and very weak cobalt blue mix. I'm going to add some more burnt sienna to that, make it just a little bit brighter. I'm being careful because I'm still making small adjustments with my brush as I paint this. And then I'll hint of the tail. No, I'm going to dry that. The trick here is there's some hard edges and soft edges. And right now, because the cow itself is still quite wet, everything I do will be a soft edge. It's better to dry it, paint the shadows as hard edges, and then soften the edges that are soft edges. So let me just go dry that. We'll do the shadow. So the shadow shape is the brown, a little bit more French ultramarine, sorry, burnt sienna and French ultramarine. You can get a small brush to soften that edge there. This shadow up here is a bit brighter than this one here. And then we'll just, again, look at soft edges. Yeah, this is a soft edge, so I'm going to wet this side and just bring the brush up to it. And then the underbelly, as it curves over, is always going to be a little bit darker than the top. So I'll just pick up a little bit of that paint and just darken it just a fraction. But because it's getting some side light, I don't want to darken it too much. Yeah, this could be a bit darker. The main thing is not to make them as strong in tone as these ones. So have a little bit more water in your mixture. And you're not going to see the full cow because of all the long grass that they're standing in. You want quite a pointy brush when you're painting these little shapes. Then we've got some grass. It's not bright green, so I'll just use this dull grey to modify my green for the grass. And we'll go back to a fan brush. I've mixed the strength of my mixture here for this foreground area. So I'm going to pick up some of this, then dip my brush halfway into clean water, and that'll be my lighter tones. And maybe a bit stronger for this. Take out most of the paint. I don't want this to be too wet. Obviously, in the photo, the tree's down a bit of a hill, but you can't actually see this shadow. But in my painting, I'm going to put the shadow in. Something like that. And these cows here, a bit stronger. Then over on this side, we've got a strong shadow. I'm going to make this distant shadow just a bit darker underneath the trees, just to help connect the trees to the ground a little bit better. If you look at this shadow shape, it's sort of lighter here, then it gets darker here. It's got some sharper looking edges and then some sort of softer ones. So what I'm going to do, I pick up some clean water or cleanish water, and in some areas just dab some water, just like that. I'm just going to darken this some more. Burnt sienna and French ultramarine. And I'll just dilute this fraction. And then here, just get my fan brush, pick up some paint. Don't want a lot of paint in my brush. I'm just using the edge, drag some of that paint down. But we want to leave some of the plants highlighted. Here I'm going to soften some of these edges. Along this edge here, just flicking the shadow up into little, think of grasses sticking up. This is more like just a notation saying, hey, there's some grasses here. Vary the color a bit. Here I'm getting a little bit of a cauliflower. All I'm going to do for that is just attack it before it dries too much. And just get rid of it that way. Make it a little bit darker under the cow, just like when you're painting a car, the shadow underneath the cow will be a little bit darker because the body of the cow is blocking the light from the sky. It's just drying a little bit muddy on me, so I'm going to spray it. Just to re-wet that area and let some of that paint flow again. And I use some of the white that I've left as little highlights on some of the rocks. This tree, I'm going to darken it, it's a bit too light, but I have to wait for this shadow area to dry. Maybe I'll just get the hairdryer on that. Throw a couple of birds in the sky. That'll do.